In the sanctuary of Artemis at Ephesus, in the summer of 41 BCE, a woman who once wore a royal diadem was dragged from her sacred refuge and executed. Ancient authors recorded the moment. Plutarch in his Life of Antony, Cassius Dio in his Roman history, and Appian in his civil wars all described soldiers violating the temple's asylum to seize and kill Arsinoe IV, the sister of Cleopatra VII. Archaeological work at the Artemis Ion confirms continuous cult activity into the Roman imperial period. Inscriptions preserved on-site attest to the long-held, inviolable right of asylum in that sanctuary. This matters because temple refuge was legally sacred. Its violation was a deliberate political signal. If you enjoy these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe. Comment below where you're listening from. I'm genuinely curious to know where these stories reach. Plutarch's account is clear on the dates and the actors. Marcus Antonius himself authorized the act in 41 BCE, under the influence of Cleopatra. This recorded fact raises immediate questions about Roman respect for Greek sanctuaries and the political calculus of Antony and Cleopatra, which I will unpack next. This includes the origins of Arsinoe's claim, and how she came to be in Ephesus. It's a story rooted in coin finds, papyri, and contemporary chronicles that point to a family feud with consequences far beyond a single execution. This sets up the next development, the Ptolemaic succession crisis that forced Arsinoe into sanctuary and exile. Archaeology and numismatics give us the first tangible traces of Arsinoe's public career. Coins bearing the name Arsinoe and royal diadems have been recovered in Anatolia and coastal Aegean hordes. Datable by style to the 40s and 30s BCE, they indicate her claim to royal status before her capture. Inscriptions from Ephesus and nearby cities preserve dedications to Artemis during the late Hellenistic period, demonstrating the temple's continued political centrality. Primary narratives from Plutarch, Cassius Dio, and Appian place Arsinoe's rise in the context of the Ptolemaic succession after Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, and the ensuing war between Cleopatra VII and Ptolemy XIII. I will show how inscriptions and coins corroborate these literary sources. Hoards dated to the 40s BCE include issues with Ptolemaic royal imagery and overstrikes, suggesting rapid political turnover. The consequence of those turnovers was that sibling rivalry became state policy, and sanctuary a refuge was turned into a political trap. From numismatics, we move to papyri. Administrative records from Egypt, preserved in Oxyrhynchus, show the bureaucratic footprint of Ptolemaic rule and the vulnerabilities of claimants like Arsinoe. This leads to her flight and the support she found among local Greek cities, a support network that would later determine her fate. Ptolemaic succession in Alexandria was a documented pattern of sibling co-rulership, marriage, and fratricide. Papyrological evidence from the Ptolemaic period, including petitions and tax records dated in regal years, shows how the royal household distributed land titles and priesthoods to secure loyalty. The brief reign of Berenice IV in 58 and 55 BCE, attested in Greek chronicles and coins, demonstrates this earlier tendency. When her father was in Rome, a sister took power and was later executed when the exiled king returned, recorded by Josephus and other Roman historians. These precedents expla.
Margaret wasn't just a servant to the crown, she was a second mother to the future Queen Mary I. But the seeds of destruction were already being sown. Because Henry VIII was a man of appetites. And his appetite for a male heir was about to devour everything Margaret held dear. When Henry's eyes wandered to Anne Boleyn, the court split. You were either for the divorce, or you were against the king. There was no middle ground. Margaret Pole made a choice. A dangerous choice. She stood by Queen Catherine. She stood by the discarded wife. To Henry, this wasn't just a difference of opinion. This was betrayal. He had given her everything, he reasoned. He had restored her titles. He had made her rich. And now, she sided with the Spanish woman against him? The king's love is a fragile flower, easily crushed. And the chill wind was beginning to blow. If Margaret was the silent rock of resistance, her son, Reginald Pole, was the thunderstorm. Reginald was brilliant. Henry had actually paid for Reginald's education. He wanted Reginald to be a great churchman who would support the Tudor state. But Reginald had a conscience. He went into exile in Italy, the heart of the Catholic world. And from the safety of Padua and Rome, he watched Henry VIII dismantle the church in England. He watched the monasteries burn. He watched the heads of good men like Thomas More and John Fisher fall into the basket. And Reginald Pole snapped. He wrote a treatise. A massive book titled Pro Ecclesiasticae Unitatis Defense of the Unity of the Church. He sent this book to Henry. It didn't just disagree with the king, it dismantled him. It called Henry a tyrant. It compared him to the worst villains of the Bible. It urged the powers of Europe to rise up and depose him. When Henry read this book, he reportedly shook with rage. The King of England was not used to being spoken to like a naughty child. He wanted Reginald Pole dead. He sent assassins to Italy to try and kill him. They failed. So, Henry turned his eyes back to England. If he couldn't kill the writer, he would kill the writer's heart. He looked at Margaret. He looked at her other sons, Henry and Geoffrey. Thomas Cromwell, the king's ruthless fixer, is reported to have said that they would make the mother eat the sour fruit of the son's planting. The trap was set. The year is 1538. The atmosphere in England is poisonous. The king is paranoid. He sees daggers in every shadow. Cromwell needs a conspiracy to feed the king's fear, to justify a purge of the old White Rose families. They arrest Geoffrey Pole, Margaret's younger son. Now, Geoffrey was not made of the same steel as his mother or his brother Reginald. He was frightened. They took Geoffrey to the Tower. We don't have the transcripts of exactly what they did to him in the dark, but we know the methods of the Tudors. The rack. The scavenger's daughter. The sleeplessness. The psychological terror. Geoffrey broke. To save his own skin, to stop the pain, he started naming names. He implicated his brother, Lord Montague. He implicated his friends. And, tragically, he implicated his mother. He claimed they had exchanged letters with Reginald. He claimed they dreamt of a time when the king would be dead and the old religion restored. Was it true? Probably not. But in Tudor England, truth is irrelevant. A confession, even one extracted under torture, is gold. Margaret was at her home, Warblington Castle, when the soldiers came. Imagine the scene. The heavy boots on the flagstones. The shouting. Margaret, an elderly woman, surrounded by her servants, watching as the king's men tore her home apart. They were looking for evidence. Letters. Weapons. They found almost nothing. A few papal bulls, old documents from the Pope that she had kept for sentimental reasons. And that tunic. The one with the 5 wounds of Christ. To you and me, it's a religious symbol. To Cromwell, it was a war flag. They claimed she was sewing a banner for a rebel army that her son Reginald was going to lead across the Channel. It was absurd. A 70-year-old woman leading an invasion? But it was enough. They took her. They didn't take her to a comfortable house arrest. They took her to the Tower. Let's dwell on the imprisonment for a moment. We often skip over this part in history books. She was imprisoned for 2 years. It's just a sentence on a page. But live it. 2.5 years. 2.5 years of waking up in the stone dark. 2.5 years of damp river air settling into arthritic joints. Margaret was used to being the mistress of households, giving orders, organizing feasts. Now, she had to beg for coal to heat her room. We have letters from her jailers. They actually wrote to the king saying, she has no clothes. She is freezing. She has only the rags on her back. Think about the psychological cruelty of that. Henry VIII, who was wearing velvet and furs paid for by the lands he stole from her, let his own cousin freeze in a cell. It was petty. It was vindictive. It was an attempt to break her spirit before he took her life. But Margaret Pole was a Plantagenet. They interrogated her. The Earl of Southampton tried to bully her into a confession. He came out of the interrogation room shaking his head. He wrote that he had never seen a woman so constant. We could get nothing from her, he admitted. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply stated she was innocent. She carved her name into the walls of her cell. You can still see carvings in the Tower today, messages left by the doomed. It is a way of saying, I was here. I existed. You can kill me, but you cannot erase me. While she sat in that cell, her world was dismantled. Her son, Lord Montague, was beheaded. Her cousin, the Marquis of Exeter, was beheaded. Geoffrey, the son who betrayed them, was pardoned, but he lived the rest of his life in a hell of guilt, eventually carving his own name into the Tower walls in a fit of madness years later. Margaret was alone. The last of her line. In 1539, the Act of Attainder was passed. This is a legal abomination. It is a law that declares a person guilty without a trial. Parliament simply voted that she was a traitor. They held up the tunic found in her house as proof. Look, Cromwell argued, the symbol of the rebellion. The lords of England, terrified for their own necks, nodded along. Yes, they said. Guilty. And still, she waited. Why the delay? Perhaps Henry was distracted. He was marrying Anne of Cleves, then divorcing her. Then marrying Catherine Howard. His mood swung like a pendulum. Or perhaps, as some historians suggest, he was keeping her as a bargaining chip. As long as Margaret was alive, Reginald Pole wouldn't launch an invasion, fearing his mother would be killed in retaliation. But by 1541, the threat of invasion had passed. The Exeter conspiracy was dead. Margaret was no longer useful as a hostage. She was just an expense. A loose end. And Henry VIII was a man who ed to tidy up. The sun rises over London, but the fog clings to the Thames. Inside the Tower, the routine begins. But this morning is different. The Lieutenant of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, arrives at Margaret's cell. He tells her to prepare herself. She asks why. He tells her she is to die. She must have thought it was a mistake. She had not been judged. She had not been sentenced in a court. I know of no crime, she said. But the order was signed. Now, we need to zoom in on the specific geography of this tragedy. Usually, high-profile prisoners were executed on Tower Green, a small patch of grass within the walls. It was private, but formal. A scaffold would be built. A crowd of dignitaries would bear witness. For Margaret, there was no scaffold. Some sources say it was because the decision was made so hastily, there was no time to build one. Others suggest it was a deliberate insult. To deny her the dignity of a stage. They led her to a corner of the courtyard, near the White Tower. The ground was just dirt and stone. A small log or a low block of wood was placed there. It wasn't the high block used for a swift execution. It was something improvised. And then, the executioner. The executioner of London was a skilled tradesman. He knew how to find the gap between the vertebrae. He knew how to swing the axe so that the head came off in one clean stroke. It was gruesome, yes, but it was quick. But the executioner was not there. He had been sent north to deal with the rebels of the Pilgrimage of Grace. In his place stood a wretched and blunderbuss youth. A boy. Maybe an apprentice. Maybe just a butcher they pulled from the street. He held the heavy axe, and his hands were shaking. Imagine Margaret's eyes fixing on him. She had lived through 4 reigns. She had seen the best and worst of humanity. And now, her end was in the hands of a terrified child. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. listen to the sounds of the courtyard. The scuffing of boots. The cawing of crows. The heavy breathing of the executioner. Margaret is asked to kneel. To lay her head on the low block. Here, the accounts diverge, and each version is more horrifying than the last. One account, the one that has become legend, says she refused to kneel. She said, "So should traitors do, and I am none." She stood tall, defying the king even in the face of death. This version says the executioner had to swing at her while she was standing, chasing her, hacking at her as she moved. While that is a powerful image of resistance, the more likely historical reality is perhaps even sadder. She was an old woman. Frail. Ill. She likely struggled not out of defiance, but out of confusion and terror. She was forced down to the block. Her neck, thin and wrinkled, was exposed. The boy raised the axe. He didn't aim. He just swung. The sound of metal hitting bone is a sound that no one forgets. He missed the neck. The axe crashed into her shoulder, smashing the scapula. Margaret screamed. She didn't die. She was in agony. "Lord Jesus, have mercy!" The boy panicked. He pulled the axe free. He swung again. Another miss. A glancing blow to the head. Blood sprayed the stones. The dignitaries, men who had seen war, men who were hardened soldiers, must have turned away. This was not an execution. This was a slaughter. The boy hacked. And hacked. And hacked. One blow. 2. 3. The count goes on. It took 11 strokes. 11 times the axe rose and fell before the Countess of Salisbury was dead. By the end, her head was barely recognizable. Her gray hair was matted with red. The ground was soaked. The wretched youth stood there, likely covered in the blood of a royal princess, gasping for air. It was over. The Plantagenet line was finally, brutally, severed. They wrapped her broken body in a cloth and buried her in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, just a few hundred yards away. She lies there today, under the flagstones, alongside Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, the wives of the man who killed her. In Rome, when the news reached Reginald Pole, he didn't rage. He went quiet. He told his secretary, "I am now the son of a martyr." He was right. Margaret's death did not legitimize Henry's rule, it stained it indelibly. Europe was horrified. The King of France, the Emperor of Spain, they looked at Henry not as a fellow monarch, but as a mad dog. Killing an old woman? A governess? A cousin? It was beneath the dignity of a king. Henry VIII died 6 years later. He died bloated, in pain, terrified of the afterlife. His dynasty, the one he killed so many to protect, would not last. His son Edward died young. His daughter Mary, Margaret's beloved charge, took the throne and tried to restore Catholicism, bringing Reginald Pole back as Archbishop of Canterbury. But her reign was short and bitter. And then came Elizabeth. And when Elizabeth died, childless, the Tudor line ended. The irony is palpable. Henry killed the Plantagenets to secure his line, but in the end, his line withered on the vine just the same. But does a story like this ever truly end? Walk the Tower Green at night. The beefeaters, the yeoman warders who guard the tower, will tell you stories. They are not men given to flights of fancy. They are military veterans. But many of them avoid that corner of the grounds on the anniversary of the execution. They speak of a shadow. A spectral figure of an elegant woman, running, stumbling. They speak of the sound of weeping. And sometimes, the faint, rhythmic thud of an axe striking stone. Is it a ghost? Or is it the collective memory of a crime so heinous that the earth itself refuses to forget it? Margaret Pole was beatified in 1886. She is now Blessed Margaret Pole. The Catholic Church recognizes her not just as a victim, but as a woman who died for her principles. She refused to sign the oath that would make Henry the head of the Church. She refused to betray her son. She refused to lie to save her life. In a world of shifting loyalties, where men like Cromwell and Cranmer bent with the wind to survive, Margaret stood like an oak tree. And like an oak, she had to be chopped down because she would not bend. Why do we obsess over this story 500 years later? Why does the death of one aristocratic woman matter when millions have died in wars since then? It matters because it exposes the terrifying fragility of civilization. Henry VIII was the government. He was the law. He was the hero of his own story. And yet, he was capable of this. The story of Margaret Pole is a warning. It warns us what happens when power is unchecked. It warns us what happens when the law becomes a weapon of the state rather than a shield for the people. When we look at the portrait of Margaret Pole that survives an older woman, wearing a hood, her face lined with worry but her eyes sharp, we see a survivor. We see a mother. She was caught in the gears of a machine she couldn't stop. She was the collateral damage of a king's ego. But in the end, who do we remember with respect? Do we respect the fat, rotting king who ordered the hit? Or do we respect the woman who faced the blunderbuss youth and his axe with the dignity of a queen? History is written by the victors, they say. But sometimes, the victims scream loud enough that history has no choice but to listen. The story of Margaret Pole is just one drop in the ocean of blood that is human history. For every Margaret, there are 1,000 names we have lost. Servants who died protecting their masters. Commoners who were hanged for stealing bread in the same era. Soldiers who died in the mud of foreign fields for kings who didn't know their names. We have a duty. A duty to dig. A duty to read the footnotes. A duty to visit the archives and blow the dust off the old scrolls. The past is not a static museum exhibit. It is alive. It is a crime scene waiting for detectives. It is a library of lessons waiting for students. If we let these stories fade, if we let Margaret Pole become just a name on a genealogy chart, then the axe wins. The silence wins. But by telling her story, by imagining her fear, her cold cell, her final prayer, we give her a voice. We deny Henry his final victory. He could take her head, but he could not take her history. So, I have a challenge for you. Don't just watch this video and move on. Go find a story. Find a local legend in your town. Find an ancestor in your family tree who faced hardship. Uncover their truth. Because every life is a novel, and most of them have never been read. Narrator, if this journey into the dark heart of Tudor England has moved you, if it has made you feel the chill of the tower and the heat of the injustice, please, take a moment to support this channel. Click that subscribe button. It's a small click for you, but it helps us keep the lights on in the archives. It helps us hire researchers, buy books, and travel to these sites to bring you the truth. Hit the like button to help the algorithm spread this story to others. Let's make sure Margaret Pole's name is known by thousands more people today than it was yesterday. And I want to hear from you in the comments. I really do. What do you think was Henry's true motivation? Was it fear? Was it malice? Or was he simply a man who had lost touch with reality? And are there other forgotten women of history you want us to cover next? Let's build a library of the lost together. Share this video with a history teacher. Share it with a friend who loves a good mystery. Share it with anyone who believes that the truth is worth fighting for. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. And this has been the story of the Countess of Salisbury. The white rose who bled red. Until next time. Keep the candles lit. The past is darker than you think.